I was on a spontaneous camping trip in the middle of fall. It was one of those impulse decisions, one last escape to the northern woods of Minnesota before winter rolled in and pressed pause on everything for months. I'd been up here plenty of times before, living just a couple hours south, so this was my regular getaway whenever I needed to clear my head. The spot I chose sat beside a small, secluded lake, one of the things I loved most about Minnesota. The state's scattered with thousands of lakes up north, which means it's not hard to find one completely to yourself. Having that solitude always felt like a little victory. Ever since I discovered this hidden place a few years ago, it became my go-to spot for camping. The first few days of the trip were uneventful. Nothing happened, just peace, quiet, and the sound of nature wrapping around me. I camped, wandered the woods, swam in the lake, and let my mind rest. It was the kind of calm that makes you forget the rest of the world exists. I felt perfectly safe. There wasn't a single thing to suggest I shouldn't be, but everything changed on the fourth morning. I woke up at sunrise, stepped out of my tent, and froze. All around my campsite, scattered across the damp ground, were footprints, heavy boot prints. Some led right up to the front of my tent. They hadn't been there before. I didn't own boots like that. Whoever it was had come during the night. While I was sleeping, a shiver went down my spine. Someone had been there, watching, maybe standing just inches from where I slept. I spent the rest of the morning combing through the woods and circling the lake, searching for any sign of whoever had been around. Nothing. No tracks leading away, no campfire, no gear, just those footprints that didn't belong. It wasn't the idea that someone else had been in the area that unsettled me. It was how they'd come quiet, in the middle of the night, right up to my tent, then vanished. It didn't make sense. I kept my eyes open all day. Leaving crossed my mind, sure, but this was supposed to be my last trip before winter. I didn't want to end it early, and besides, there was no sign that whoever it was had stuck around. Maybe they came hoping the lake was empty, saw me there, and decided to move on. That's what I told myself anyway. The day dragged by slowly. I hung around the site, trying not to overthink it. When the sun set, I sat by the campfire and let the crackle of the flames drown out my unease. I tried to convince myself it had all been harmless, that thinking about it wouldn't change anything. The water lapped against the shore, the wind rustled through the trees, and for a while, I felt calm again. I leaned back in my chair, bundled in my winter jacket, half asleep, but not completely gone. My eyes were closed, but I was still aware, still there. Then I heard it, a voice, calling my name. My eyes flew open, every muscle in my body locked. I looked around wildly. The forest was silent, still. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. My heart pounded. Had I dreamed it? It felt too real, too close. I hesitated before calling out, "Hello?" My voice echoed through the trees. No answer, just the low hum of the woods. I tried to shake it off. A half-asleep hallucination, maybe. That's what I wanted to believe. But my heartbeat refused to slow. Minutes passed. Then, again, the same voice. My name, from the darkness beyond the firelight. This time, I knew I hadn't imagined it. The voice wasn't familiar, but it carried a strange tone, almost pleading, like it wanted me to come closer. I stood up, staring into the trees. "Hello again?" I called, my voice trembling. Silence stretched. Then the voice repeated my name, a fourth time. Something in the way it said it felt wrong, like it knew exactly what it was doing, luring me out, inch by inch, into the pitch-black forest. No way was I falling for that. My instincts screamed at me to move. I began packing, my hands shaking. The campfire had burned down to glowing embers, and I could barely see. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig, made me freeze. The voice grew closer. So did the footsteps. Whoever it was knew how to move quietly, too quietly. When I finally got my gear together, I strapped on my backpack and pulled out my flashlight. I hesitated. Turning it on might make me visible, but leaving it off meant stumbling through the dark. I chose darkness. Better to vanish. I slipped into the trees, heading in the opposite direction of the voice. My name rang out one last time behind me. Against my better judgment, I looked back. Through the trees, I could just make out the dying glow of my campfire, and behind it, the faint outline of a figure, still, watching. Something about its shape didn't look right. I turned and bolted. The voice followed me once more, then stopped. The woods went deathly silent. The hike back to my car was the longest, most nerve-wracking walk of my life. But when I finally saw the faint glint of my car in the distance, I nearly collapsed from relief. I thought about calling the cops. But what would I even say? Some guy called my name in the woods? They'd think I was crazy. Now, nearly 3 years later, I still don't know what really happened that night. Part of me wishes I'd walked toward the voice just to find out who or what it was. But the smarter part of me knows, if I had, that might have been the last decision I ever made. I prefer to stay anonymous, but what I'm about to tell you still creeps into my thoughts late at night. It happened a few years ago, back when I worked at a small, quiet office tucked behind a strip mall. That's where I met Cameron. We got hired the same week, and our desks were side by side. Within days, we clicked, trading jokes, venting about work, and talking endlessly about the outdoors. Hiking, camping, climbing. We were both obsessed. We'd always joke about planning a trip together someday. I never thought it would actually happen. Then one morning, Cameron's desk was empty, cleared out. I asked around and learned he'd been fired. No one could say why. Later that day, I got a text from him. "Hey man, we should finally do that camping trip. Just you and me." I felt bad for him. He'd lost his job, and honestly, I missed his company. So, I agreed. We picked a weekend and decided to meet at a trailhead several hours west of the city. Deep forest, almost no cell service. When I arrived, Cameron was already waiting, grinning like he hadn't seen civilization in months. But something about him felt off. His energy was different. At work, he'd been easygoing, almost goofy. Now he was quiet, intense. His eyes lingered too long when he smiled, like he was thinking about something he couldn't say. Still, I pushed it aside. Maybe he was just embarrassed about losing his job. We hiked for hours through thick forest, chatting about nothing in particular. When I casually brought up his firing, his expression hardened. "Doesn't matter," he said. "I'm better off anyway." That was it. He changed the subject immediately. By the time we reached the campsite, the sun was low. We set up our tents, cooked a small meal, and sat quietly as the forest dimmed around us. Out here, it was completely still. No cars, no voices, just the crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of wind through pine needles. After we ate, Cameron suddenly stood up. "Be right back," he said. No explanation, just turned and walked straight into the trees. I waited, assuming he needed a bathroom break or something. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, I heard footsteps returning. He stepped back into the firelight, calm and silent, as if he hadn't just wandered into total darkness for half an hour. "You good?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Just needed a minute." His tone made it clear I shouldn't ask more, so I didn't. But when it happened again, him leaving mid-conversation, staring into the woods before drifting off wordlessly, my gut twisted. Something was wrong. When he came back the second time, I asked where he'd gone. Nowhere. That's all he said. Just nowhere. Then he smiled, that same strange smile I told myself I was overreacting. I'd known Cameron for months. Maybe I just wasn't used to seeing him outside the office. We stayed up a little longer, talking around the fire until exhaustion took over. Then we went to our tents for the night. When I closed my eyes, I thought I'd fall asleep easily, but something about that forest felt heavy, like it was listening. I woke up in the middle of the night for no clear reason. My tent was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that hums in your ears. I unzipped the flap just a few inches and looked out. The campfire was dying, a faint orange glow barely lighting the clearing. Cameron's tent was open, empty. I whispered his name once. No response. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Then I noticed his flashlight was gone, but there wasn't any beam of light in the trees. No movement, no sound, just darkness pressing in from every side. Minutes passed before I heard something faint. Voices, 2 of them, low, muffled, maybe 50 feet away. They sounded like they were arguing or whispering fast, like they didn't want to be overheard. "Cameron?" I called. The voices stopped. Dead silence. I froze, my breath shallow. For a few seconds, the only sound was the faint crackle of cooling embers. Then, from the edge of the woods, Cameron stepped out of the shadows. He looked tense, his face pale, but his smile forced. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just went for a walk." But before I could respond, a crunch echoed from the trees behind him. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. I locked eyes with him. "Who's out there?" He hesitated, jaw tightening. "No one." Another crunch, closer. I stood up. "Cameron." "I heard them. Who's out there?" He didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the trees, then back at me, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his expression. Guilt or fear, maybe both. The footsteps came again, closer still, moving through the brush toward our camp. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide anymore. Adrenaline hit me like a flood. I grabbed my phone and keys from the tent pocket and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't shout his name. I just ran, branches whipped against my arms as I sprinted through the dark, following the faint outline of the trail illuminated only by moonlight. Behind me, I could hear voices, Cameron's and another man's, echoing faintly through the trees. I didn't stop until I saw the glint of my car through the branches. My hands shook as I unlocked the door, slammed it shut, and hit the locks. My headlights burst on, cutting through the black forest, but the trail behind me was empty. I sat there for a long time, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I drove off, leaving everything behind. My tent, my gear, everything. When I got home, I texted Cameron. The message never delivered. He'd already blocked me. That was years ago. I've never heard from him again. Sometimes I wonder what he was doing out there, who he was talking to. Maybe he wasn't planning to hurt me. Maybe it was something worse. All I know is this. Every time I drive past a wooded area at night, I still think I see someone standing just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. Last November, I decided to escape to my hometown for a quiet week away. My goal was simple: reconnect with old friends and spend a few days in a cozy rental cabin tucked deep in the woods. The cabin wasn't far from town, and behind it, a narrow trail led to a small, secluded campground. I'd never been camping before, but after weeks of research and assembling my gear, I felt ready for my first solo adventure. I wanted it to be somewhere familiar, At least if something went wrong, I could retreat to the cabin safely. The first couple of days were uneventful. I caught up with friends, lounged at the cabin, and double-checked every piece of camping equipment I'd brought. By the third day, I finally set out down the trail. It was short, just an hour to the site, but my mind kept drifting. Early on, I noticed a strange sensation, an almost imperceptible pressure, as if unseen eyes were following me. At first, I blamed my nerves. I'd never been alone in a forest before, but as the minutes passed, that uneasy feeling only grew stronger. Every rustle of the leaves, every snapped twig made my stomach tighten. By the time I reached the campground, the sun was halfway down, filtering through the trees in long, golden streaks. The campsite was modest, barely more than a patch of flattened earth with remnants of previous campers scattered about. As I unpacked my gear and set up my tent, I felt a little safer being out in the open. That is, until he arrived. He appeared seemingly out of nowhere, walking up the trail with a single bag slung over his shoulder. He was about my age, tall, with a sharp, almost unnatural smile that didn't reach his eyes. His expression froze in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. It was just me here, in a place I thought I'd chosen because it was safe. But now, that feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. I tried to ignore him, focusing on gathering sticks and preparing a small fire. He set up his tent not far from mine, a mesh tent with no rain cover, no supplies, nothing but the bare structure. And then he just sat there, doing nothing, watching me. Every time I glanced his way, he locked eyes with me for just a moment before looking away. I couldn't shake the growing pit in my stomach. Something about him was wrong, very wrong. As the sun dipped lower, I realized staying any longer might be a mistake. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but the thought of running while it was still light gave me hope I could escape safely. I hastily packed up, my hands trembling, and as I slung my backpack over my shoulders, he finally moved. He stood beside his tent, silent, rigid, clearly tracking my every motion. My pulse quickened. I forced myself to keep moving, trying to ignore the dread clawing at my chest. The trail back felt unnervingly long. At first, I was relieved. No one behind me. My heart slowed slightly, my nerves trickling down. Then, just a few minutes into the walk, I dared a glance over my shoulder. He was there through the trees, moving toward me, slowly but deliberately. My stomach dropped, and fear hit me like ice water. I picked up my pace, my legs pumping as adrenaline surged through me. I dared not look again, focusing only on the faint golden glow of the cabin peeking through the trees. By the time I reached the cabin, dusk was settling in, leaving the woods dark and silent. I slammed the door shut behind me, fumbling to lock every latch. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the keys. I pressed my back against the door and peered out the window. The forest had gone still, empty. But then came the first knock, hard, repeated, like someone hammering with their fist. Panic clawed at me as I fumbled for my phone, calling the police. The knocking stopped for a brief moment. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps circling the cabin, heavy and deliberate. I didn't dare move. Then, a loud thump against a window made me jump, heart racing like never before. And just as suddenly, the noise stopped. Silence, except for the faint rustle of leaves fading into the distance. Minutes later, 2 officers arrived, flashlights cutting through the dark. I explained everything: the campsite, the man, the terrifying feeling in the woods. They agreed it sounded like he had dangerous intentions. They searched the area, but never found him. His tent at the campsite was gone, leaving no trace of his presence. I've never returned to that forest, and I haven't gone camping alone since. But the strangest part? That feeling of being watched, of knowing someone had been waiting for me, hasn't left me. I keep replaying that night, wondering what he wanted, what might have happened if I hadn't left when I did. The one thing I know for certain, sometimes your gut instinct is the only thing standing between you and disaster. That night, ignoring it could have been my last mistake.